isolation could put them at greater risk. There's also growing concern that social workers don't have the protective equipment to keep them safe when they do continue to see families, vulnerable adults and people with mental health throughout the coronavirus crisis. We're going to talk now to Anne Longfield. Anne Longfield is the Children's Commissioner. Also with us, Gavin Morgan, who is a professional officer at the British Association of Social Workers, and he's a social worker himself. Welcome to both of you. I wonder, Mr. Morgan, do some social workers think that families, where there are vulnerable children, are using coronavirus as an excuse to refuse visits from social workers?
Well, it's hard to say that, but what we are aware of is that the children at risk are going they're going to be more vulnerable in a period of lockdown, because we're not going to have the same level of engagement with them that we normally would do. So that's where the concerns lie.
Well, what are your specific concerns then? Well,
at the moment, we're in lockdown, so we can't provide the service that we normally would. Now, what we are finding, and from our survey, we've had a number of people we've had over 1,200 social workers respond to this survey. We've heard some great examples of people being creative and using technology, for example, to engage with families, but we're not able to do those visits that we normally would. Those visits enable us to do the one-to-one support, enables us to investigate where there are concerns about the safety of the child. At the moment, the problem that we have is that there isn't a consistent level of guidance coming from central government and our regulator to help social workers know how best to approach child protection social work and safeguarding in a lockdown situation.
Okay, well, what are the potential risks to some children then in this partial lockdown scenario?
Well, the existing risks remain. I mean, we work with children who are exposed to parental drug and alcohol problems, domestic violence, mental health issues, and a variety of other concerns. The difficulty is that we haven't got the usual processes for how we address that. How we normally would safeguard children in those scenarios it has changed because we're in lockdown. In addition to that, we don't have these children are isolated because there's not the usual monitoring going on by our partner agencies, and so that is where the additional risk lies, and it's partially because the monitoring isn't happening in the same way it normally would, and it's partly because we're not able to go out there in the same way we can. As I said, there's pockets of good practice, but there's another issue here, and it's about the equipment. For social workers to be able to go out safely to support these families and interact, they need the equipment to do it. We're hearing that social workers, they're not being provided with the basics like hand gel. They've been given some advice and equipment which, in all honesty, isn't really effective.
Okay. Thank you. Let me bring in Anne Longfield. As the Children's Commissioner for England, how worried are you, Anne Longfield, about children, vulnerable children, potentially being trapped in homes with domestic abuse perpetrators through this partial lockdown?
Well, as you'd imagine, I'm really concerned about this group of really vulnerable children. It's a significant group. I'm very pleased that government opened schools this week for vulnerable children, those with a social worker, but we don't yet know how many of those children actually went to school, and anecdotally some of those figures seem to be quite low. But there'll be others who didn't qualify for those places, who are still very highly vulnerable. We think there's probably about 1 million children who are largely invisible. And if you can imagine, during normal times, school would be the safe place, it would have structure in their lives, there'd be trusted adults there, and actually people could see if things were going wrong. Now, without that, we need to rethink every way of keeping in touch with these children.
Because there will be... Sorry, I was just going to say to Anne Longfield, there will be kids living in a household with a violent parent, and no one will know that there is domestic abuse going on behind those walls.
That's right. I mean, there are very high, really concerning numbers of children who live in households where there's domestic abuse, addiction to alcohol and drugs, or indeed severe mental illness. So these are children at the best of times are invisible for an awful lot of agencies, But given now that we're all going to lock down into our homes, there needs to be that additional push to reach out to them. Now, I agree this has to be the next phase of government focus and guidance. I think we need to rethink how the structures can be in place locally. There's been talk of community hubs for communities generally. I think we have to think again about making those family hubs and family kind of coordination available locally. Some schools doing fantastic things. They're ringing out to children every week. They're putting in place all sorts of escalation measures. And there'll be children's centres and family centres who will be now often running virtually doing the same. But we need to get it consistent throughout the country and then look at those pinch points as well. Those families who are going to fall off the cliff of employment, those families who are sofa surfing at the moment and need to be in safe housing. Well, there's a lot of children here who need urgent attention.
What are you calling on the government to do for those children who are going to find themselves in financial hardship because their mum and dad might be out of work?
Well, I think, again, there'll be, we know there's already huge more demands on universal credit, and we also know that universal credit system is slow, is quite rigid, and will be overwhelmed. So I would like to see families with children taking priority here. I would like to see upfront payments. I would like to see an additional amount put into child benefits this week to be able to give families a little bit of extra help here. Every aspect of the system that supports vulnerable children and their families is now under severe strain. I know government has this in mind, so I know that there is an understanding and recognition there, but we need this kind of dissemination of the guidance of the infrastructure and indeed more cash, very, very likely, out to councils who are doing amazing work, but they need help and need coordination and guidance.
Gavin Morgan, I wonder if some of these issues about vulnerable children are keeping social workers awake at night.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I'm speaking to social workers. As I said, the survey has raised all kinds of concerns from social workers because ultimately they're working so hard and they're very worried about the well-being of these very vulnerable children. And I think Anne made some really important points here. It's great that the government have recognised that vulnerable children perhaps would benefit from going to school, but I've just a couple of days ago I spoke to a social worker who's been faced with this awful dilemma of having to choose which of the vulnerable children can go because there's limited placements in those schools, and this is where we have to be creative. And again, as Anne said, there needs to be consistency in how we do this, and ultimately social workers do need still to go out and see some of these children. They need the equipment to do that, and I come back to this point. Social workers we're speaking to are telling us still that they haven't got the equipment they need to do this safely. They need for both their own safety, but also for the communities that they're communicating and visiting.
Thank you both very much.